Hello and welcome to the Met Office Deep Dive, a regular format that we record every Tuesday. And if you enjoy these, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss them in the future. Now, often we do a deep dive on the UK's weather for the forthcoming week and beyond. This week, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to take a deep dive into the sea, but I won't need my wetsuit because at the moment, especially in the waters around the UK, the sea is unusually warm. In some places, 4 to 5 degrees above average. Not just surrounding the UK and Ireland, we've also got unusual warmth across much of the North Atlantic and elsewhere around the globe. What's causing this unusual warmth in the sea surface temperatures in places around the world? What does it mean for the weather around the UK and elsewhere in the world? And what can we expect from the UK's weather over the next few days? How warm will it get? But let's take a look at the global sea surface temperatures first, because they are unusually warm. In fact, they are record-breaking. Now, this chart here shows each line, the temperature through the year from January to December on the right there. And each line represents a particular year. The years are listed below. And the green line here, that's 2022, so one of the warmer years. But on top is the current year, 2023, and you can see it is significantly higher than all the other lines on record going back to 1981. So at the moment, global sea surface temperatures are well above average, but also above the previous record. And in fact, April and May were both record-breaking months for global sea surface temperatures. One of the reasons for this is the emerging El Niño. Now, El Niño has been declared from NOAA, the North American or the US Met Service, and they have declared NOAA because of this. There we go, let's go back to the sea surface temperature map. Because of this pattern that we're starting to see, this classic El Niño temperature anomaly pattern that is emerging from South America out into the tropical Central and East Pacific. Much warmer than normal sea surface temperatures here, and this kind of pattern is indicative of El Niño, and that sea surface temperature and the atmospheric temperature has reached the threshold for NOAA to declare El Niño. What does that mean? Well, in the past few years, we've had La Niña, which is El Niño's sister pattern. And basically, in the Pacific, we see this 2 to 7 year oscillation in sea surface temperatures and corresponding atmospheric temperatures and pressure. And what that means is that it oscillates between warmer than average seas and then cooler than average seas with the La Niña. Now, we've had 3 La Niñas in a row just now, which is fairly unusual. La Niña takes in heat from the atmosphere and stores it into the oceans. And so what we see is slight global cooling when we've had a La Niña. It also affects weather patterns across the world, leading to wetter than normal weather across parts of Australia and Indonesia, and drier than normal weather in parts of South America. But what we're seeing now with El Niño emerging is that global atmospheric temperatures are expected to rise this year, even more than they would be expected with global warming. And this year or next year could end up being the warmest year on record. Certainly there's a very high probability of one of the next 5 years being the warmest year on record because of this El Niño that is emerging and the general upward trend with global average surface temperatures. Now, not only are we expecting temperatures averaged across the globe to increase because of El Niño, but it is likely to affect weather patterns, and so we're likely to see wetter than normal weather across parts of South America and parts of California as well because of these warmer seas. But we're also likely to see drier than normal weather on the other side of the Pacific for the likes of Australia and Indonesia. And so for Australia, for example, it was a very wet year last year for Sydney, and for northern parts of Australia in particular, we see this big oscillation between wet years and dry years because of El Niño and La Niña, this El Niño southern oscillation. And so drier than average conditions are expected across parts of Australia. That does, of course, increase the risk of wildfires in Australia when it ends up being drier than normal. So we've got El Niño, But we've also got this remarkable sea surface temperature anomaly pattern across parts of the North Atlantic, and we've also got this really marked increase in temperatures over the last couple of months. Now, just like the previous graph, we've got January to December here. All the various years are plotted on the graph going back to 1960. The lighter the colour, the more recent the year. So you can see the darker colours tend to be of this sea surface temperature difference, which is lower than normal, and then we've got the lighter colours indicating a warming in recent years. But this current year, coloured in red there, well, that's really outperforming in terms of heat all the others. Now this obviously has a human component in terms of the average increase in global temperatures, as you can see from the trend, with the lighter colours being the more recent years and those years being the warmer years. But there's also something else that's going on, and that is, I'll just switch back to the temperature anomaly map, that is the fact that we often see trade winds coming out of Sahara and moving across the Atlantic, and they stir up the seas, leading to some mixing and some cooling of the waters, but they also carry some dust with them. And so with this layer of dust, you get less solar insolation, and that doesn't warm up the seas as much. But this year, those trade winds have been markedly reduced, and we've seen less stirring up of the seas and less dust as a result, and that's led to this big increase in temperatures off the coast of Africa, affecting much of the east of the North Atlantic. So it's not just the fact that the global average temperatures are increasing. There is, of course, there's that background signal, but there's also this natural variability in terms of trade winds and wind patterns and dust levels and so on, that is contributing to some of that significant rise in sea surface temperatures across the eastern part of the North Atlantic. What does this mean? Well, we're seeing the kinds of temperatures here that we'd normally expect much later in the season, so August, September, and that is, of course, when the hurricane season tends to peak. Now, hurricanes form when you get these little instability features, little clusters of thunderstorms developing in the warm seas off the coast of Africa, and then they get carried away across the North Atlantic. And development at this time of year tends to be more limited because the seas tend to be a bit cooler. What you'd normally get at this time of year are the early tropical storms. The hurricane season started on the 1st of June. In June, you'd normally expect features to develop more towards the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, where the seas are a bit warmer than over here. But now, these seas are about as warm as they get in August and September. Therefore, we are expecting, and now we are seeing, much further east development of these tropical storms, tropical depressions, and potential for hurricanes. And just to illustrate that point, this is from the National Hurricane Centre, and we're already seeing this tropical storm Brett much further east and south than you'd normally expect at this time of year. Also, 60% chance that this X feature here, a cluster of thunderstorms, fairly disorganised at the moment, could develop into a tropical feature as well. These systems are in waters that are above waters that are highly conducive to storm development at the moment, or cyclone development, because you've got the high sea surface temperatures, you've got low wind shear. That's where the winds change with height, and when you've got wind shear, the wind shear can tend to blow these storms apart before they get going. You've got low wind shear in this part of the ocean at the moment, and so highly favourable conditions for these features to develop into tropical storms, and that's what we're seeing with Brett. Now, for Brett itself, this is what the National Hurricane Centre predict. This is the predicted path, and it looks likely that it will become a hurricane later this week into Wednesday and Thursday, before approaching the Lesser Antilles. Then the track gets very uncertain as it heads towards the Caribbean, and it's uncertain about how much it will affect the likes of Puerto Rico and other parts of the Caribbean. But it does bring the risk of flash flooding, a storm surge, very strong winds, and so on. So this is a feature that you would normally expect later in the hurricane season, this far east and south, but it's already formed early in the season in this location because of the very high sea surface temperatures. Now, At the same time as you've got these high sea surface temperatures developing, you've got El Niño emerging. What does that mean for the hurricane season? Well, what El Niño tends to do is it produces more wind shear across the North Atlantic. Now, historically, that's meant that you have fewer hurricanes in an El Niño year because, as I mentioned, that wind shear tends to, with the winds differing with height, tends to blow apart emerging tropical storms and hurricanes before they can really get going. So that's good news. But at the same time, we've got these unusually high sea surface temperatures which are expected to continue for the rest of the season. And the Met Office forecast is actually for above average hurricanes and tropical storms because of those high sea surface temperatures and another couple of factors as well. And so despite El Niño forming, the forecast from the Met Office is for above average activity, and we're seeing the first signs of that with the emergence of these unusually far east storms developing across the North Atlantic. Now, I mentioned the seas across the UK and Ireland as well. Let's take a closer look at that because actually the seas at the moment across the UK and Ireland are in places 4 to 5 or even more degrees above average, particularly off the coast of eastern Scotland, northeast England and Ireland. So 5 degrees plus above average. In fact, it's one of the biggest anomalies in sea surface temperatures on the planet. Having said that, you'll notice some blue colours there across the coast of Canada. So not forgetting, there are some cold anomalies across the world, but the reds greatly outnumber the blues. So that's why the global sea surface temperatures are above average, or above the previous record at the moment, in fact. So what does it mean for the UK? Well, let's take a look at what's caused it first of all. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly through the last month or so. Now this is currently showing the dates here, 9th, 10th, 11th May, and some spots above average. But as we go into the 21st, 22nd of May, it's beginning to warm up. However, watch what happens through the first week of June. It's remarkable how quickly those seas warm up across the coasts of the UK and Ireland. Right now, really intense reds appearing. And that coincided, of course, with the much warmer weather that we saw developing across the UK. A lot of sunshine through the middle part of June and very high temperatures as the winds switched from the cooler easterlies that we saw through May and the first half or the first week of June to the southwesterlies, the humid air that came along for the second week of June. So those sea surface temperatures at the moment are well above average for the UK and Ireland. And as a result, NOAA have declared a Category 4 marine heat wave. Now these marine heat waves aren't to do with the absolute temperatures, so you might be thinking, well, the sea's still pretty cold off the coast of eastern Scotland. It's not what I'd call hot. And that's true, but the seas around the coast of the UK and Ireland are about what you'd expect much later in the summer. So there's normally peak around September. So these are the kinds of temperatures we'd expect around August and September. And these unusually high temperatures have all sorts of impacts on marine life, fishing and oxygen and nutrients in the seas. And that's why they can be so disruptive, these marine heat waves. And NOAA declaring a Category 4 marine heat wave. This map here shows the different categories of heat wave across the globe. And you can see these darker colours here across the UK and Ireland indicating that marine heat wave. So it's important in terms of marine life and so on, but what does it actually mean for the UK's weather? Well, it means a couple of things. When you have high sea surface temperatures, you're less likely to get sea fog and sea mist because that tends to be caused by lower or cooler seas and warmer air above it. So we're less likely to see mist and fog around the coasts over the next few days. We're more likely to see showers developing over the seas over the next few days. And we are indeed seeing some showers continuing tonight, for example, over the coasts of western UK. And that wouldn't normally happen at this time of year because the seas are cooler than the land. But also, they're likely to keep the UK relatively warm through the next few weeks and months. Many other factors influence the UK's weather, of course. Many other factors outweigh sea surface temperatures at this time of year, such as the amount of sunshine we get and the wind direction and so on. But this is going to be one contributing factor over the next few weeks and months in terms of how warm it will be. And on that, actually, you might be or you might not be surprised to find that June this year is currently running at the warmest on record. Now, this is the rolling average temperature across the UK for June. The average line, 30-year average, is in the middle. That's the black line. And then you've got the warmest June on record on the top. That's the red. And then you've got, on the bottom, you've got the coldest. And what we're seeing this June is that it was actually around average for the first week or so. And then the remarkable increase in temperatures across the country that we saw from around the 8th, 9th, 10th of June really boosted that temperature. And now the average temperature across the UK, taking into account day and night and up and down the country, is 15.4 degrees, which is 2.1 degree, I beg your pardon, above the average and a little above the previous record, 1940 and 1976. Those were the two record-breaking years, 14.9 Celsius, the average temperature. So we're currently, if it carries on like this, it'll be the warmest June on record, is what I'm saying. Now, if you live in the east, you might find that hard to believe because, of course, the temperatures, certainly for the first week of June, were remarkably different across the UK, especially when it comes to maximum temperatures, so the daytime highs, and this map shows it very well. This is the latest anomaly up to the 19th of June, about average on the east coast. It was below average for the first week, and those temperatures have recovered in the second week, but well above average in the west, more than 3.5 degrees above average. And in fact, those average temperatures across the UK, the average maximum temperatures, are about 3.6 degrees above the 30-year average. So it has turned out to be a very warm June. It's still 10 days to go, and so yeah, it's too early to say whether it will be the warmest June on record or not, but if things carry on as they are, it is looking very feasible. And just before I go, just to mention about how the weather will change over the next week or so. There'll be more details in the 10-day trend on Wednesday, but just to mention that it is in fact turning warmer again across southern parts of the UK, increasing these spells of sunshine expected through the next few days. Showers will start to disappear from Thursday and into Friday and the weekend, and by the weekend some spots in the southeast will be approaching 30 Celsius. But for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of North Wales, still some showery rain about through the rest of the week, and even some longer spells of rain, especially across western Scotland for the weekend, which of course is good news for many because we do need the rain in western Scotland. So it'll be interesting to see how this month turns out. It's certainly been a remarkable month, both in terms of air temperature and, as we've seen, sea temperature. So this was a deep dive into the sea around the world and around the UK, and hopefully I've managed to explain how things are shaping up. But if you've got any questions, please do type them in the comments and we'll try and answer them. And subscribe if you enjoy these, and send us your likes, send us your feedback. Let us know if there's any other topics you want us to do a deep dive on. But for now, that's all from me. Bye-bye.